Hello and welcome to Weekly MTG. I'm your host Blake Rasmussen, and we are here for our normal BNR stream to talk about the announcement that we had yesterday. We've been gathering questions, listening to all of your feedback online, and today here we're going to discuss some of what we're going to talk about. We're going to rehash some of what was in the articles yesterday, what we announced. We're going to go into more detail, as is the case of Legacy and Vintage, as many people have pointed out. And we're going to talk about some of the formats that we didn't take action in as well. And to do that, as is often the case, we have our two fantastic guests here, Jadine and Carmen Klumperens. Welcome.
Howdy. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so we are going to go through the formats, starting with the formats where we took some action and going from there. So obviously the big news from yesterday were the changes made in Standard, so we can show those up on the screen. We took action against Badger Mole Cub, Storm Chasers Talent, and Grand. So we're going to talk about each of these cards individually, but Jadine, first, I kind of want to talk about why now.
Right.
Some of these cards have been discussed for a bit. We've discussed some of these cards for a bit. We also have kind of a yearly point where we kind of like to make standard changes once a year. So talk about the timing, first of all.
Yeah, so, right. Badger Mole Cub and Storm Chasers Talent have been in BNR conversations for a while. I've mentioned them in multiple BNR announcements. They have been pillars of the format. I don't think it is a surprise that these cards eventually got banned. The thing that is maybe surprising is that it happened now and not at some other point. So ultimately, banned and restricted decisions on our end are a bit of a cost-benefit analysis. It is almost impossible to have a format that could not be at least a little improved if you're willing to ban cards at no cost. Formats are very complex, monstrous things that we cannot fully predict. There will often be something that could be a slight improvement. But banning a card is a really big cost. People can't play it. They've acquired these cards. They ruin their decks. They've invested time and energy in. So we don't make changes kind of without having a really good reason and having things really proven. So both Badger Mole Cub and Storm Chasers Talent and also Grand were contributing to some unhealthy patterns in the format. The format of Standard was too fast. It was not that fun to play at times. Games were ending too early. You had to build your decks to be able to answer Badger Mole Cub, to be able to deal with Storm Chasers Talent loops. In the end game, you were squeezed and you were having a really hard time engaging with the format. There were some things going on that weren't the best from a gameplay perspective. But the metagame was balanced. We had two pillars of the format. We had Badger Mole Cub and green decks on one end. We had various forms of blue-red on the other. And these things were keeping each other in check. And there were also room for other things to exist in the format. We have the various Jeskai Revelation decks. We had Mardu Discard, just other things going on that could compete. So we were content to let this format continue, even though there were clear problems, because they weren't severe enough to warrant a banned action. So what changed? Why did we finally make the call? Basically, our data started to look like this paradigm was about to break, that there would be a clear best deck, and the format would deteriorate into a spot where it has unhealthy patterns, is too fast, and also isn't balanced. I can't say for sure that that would have happened. It is very hard to be predictive about things, but our data looked like that was very likely. And that risk that we would enter a RCQ season for Standard where people really didn't want to play because they weren't enjoying the games and there wasn't interesting thoughts in actually selecting your deck led us to say, okay, now's the time. We should just pave the way and make sure we have a better and more diverse format to play.
Yeah, well, and I think you mentioned it in there, but the RCQ season kicking off was also, I think, another good reason. We've got another BNR coming up October 12th, but that's going to be kind of in the middle of the season. That's a bad time to do it. People have already started doing their decks, and we know that that messes things up. So let's talk about the cards a little bit individually, and we'll start with Badger Mole Cub. It's no secret that Badger Mole Cub has been powering green decks since it came out. Are you at all worried about green's place in the metagame after this?
Yeah, so Badger Cub was the linchpin in green decks. It was kind of a necessity to play green, was to have 4 Badger Cubs. It was one of the biggest power outliers for the color and was really powering it. And we will have to see where green can find a place. There's still some really strong green things going on. The landfall decks could potentially exist in a weakened form without Badger Cub. There are still strong things to be going on there. But yeah, we'll have to see what can happen. But the flip side is Badger Cub was also really restricting what you could do in the format. So the extent to which the format is going to change because Badger Cub isn't there is really hard to say. We're just really going to have to see.
Yeah, there's a certain extent where the degree to which Badger Cub is a removal check is really hard to appreciate when you first read the card, where something like Llanowar Elves is going to be really strong whenever you have it on the play, but the amount that it can actually put you ahead is very controlled, it's incremental, and at most you're going to be going up 1 mana.
Yeah.
Whenever you start to draw 2 Badger Cubs and they don't have the removal spell, all of a sudden you're seeing 10, 12 mana as early as the 3rd turn.
Yep.
And that degree of impact from a 2-mana card is just something that is really hard to appreciate in the moment.
Right. 60 card Magic in Standard is more fun when there are clear phases of development. You kind of get to have some pretty calm early turns, get some stuff going on, then stuff starts to happen in the mid game, and then the game pushes to a conclusion. Badger Cub was just skipping to the end, especially when, as Carmen mentions, in multiples or with any other mana dork, Llanowar Elves into Badger Cub, just really explosive starts.
Yep. All right, next let's talk about Storm Chaser's talent. It's been around a little bit longer than Badger Cub. Yeah, so what lessons did you take from Storm Chaser's talent?
Yeah, so Storm Chaser's talent, there's a whole category of things that we have learned about in starting to think about bigger Standard with many more sets and 3 full years of cards. What kind of abilities and types of cards get stronger with the card pool? And some of them we caught when we started thinking about this in theory, and you'll never see those things because we figured it out before we even launched it. Other things we didn't quite catch, like prowess, just as a relatively simple keyword that we put on creatures all the time, stacks so powerfully when you can play a much larger number of efficient 1-mana instants and sorceries to go with your prowess things. So cards that would have been totally reasonable because you couldn't get the density of things that work with it in kind of 8-set Standard are really, really strong in 3-year Standard. Storm Chaser's talent is a prime example. Not only is it one of the cheapest prowess creatures of all time as just a 1/1 prowess creature, but also is a spell that triggers prowess, kind of making your deck not even have to balance between creatures and things that trigger prowess. At the same time, it is a 1-mana card that produces 2 pieces of cardboard, is hard to answer, and gives the deck a really resilient late game. Personally, the biggest lesson I've taken from this card is we need to make sure that our 1-mana cards scale appropriately with the game, which is to say mostly that they don't. 1-mana cards should get worse as the game goes on. And if you are doing things with your 1-mana cards on turn 6 or 7, you should feel at a really disadvantage against people who have 5-drops in their deck. But instead, Storm Chaser's talent, bringing back Boomerang Basics and going off, was a really powerful engine. And that's just a little bit too much all sides covered for a really cheap card.
Yeah. All right, makes sense. Speaking of 1-mana spells, let's talk about Grand. Now, the internet's been pretty, I would say generally the reception for the Standard bans has been very positive, and people have looked at Grand and been like, yeah, of course, this card's really good. But there was a little bit more discussion about Grand internally than the other two.
Yeah, so Badger Cub and Storm Chaser's talent, very clear bans. They have been huge problems for a long time. Grand has a lot of the same problems. It is contributing to the speed of the format. It is a cheap card that demands interaction. It has a lot of the same play pattern issues, but to a somewhat lesser degree. And it's also very specific. You have to be playing with these lessons cards, which are, in general, below rate compared to the rest of the format. So you are making a sacrifice to put this in your deck. It kind of comes back to the problem that the blue-red shells in Standard were really strong, played really similarly from deck to deck, but shared very few cards.
Yeah.
We just have so many different options and ways to play this blue-red style of gameplay that it wasn't super clear that just banning Storm Chaser's talent would be enough to keep every blue-red variant down. And even with banning Grand as well, there's stuff like Is It Spelementals variants that are a little bit less affected still and can still probably see play, which is great. We love to see stuff continue. But Grand having these same play pattern issues and contributing to the speed of the format was another spot where we thought it would be a good idea to take this away from the format, make sure that 1-mana cards are not quite as removal checky, quite as contributing to overall game plans.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, you know, something you said about Storm Chaser's talent rung a little true for me too. You know, you mentioned these cards shouldn't still be great on turn 5 or 6. And I remember when we were having the discussion about BNR, Dave Humphreys was like, yeah, some matchups, the right thing to do with Grand is to wait until turn 5 or 6, play it, get, 4 or 5 mana value out of it, and then it dies. And great.
Right, and then you can't even answer it.
Yeah.
You play it, you instantly play your sorcery, you have some instance in response, and you get all your mana without really your opponent having a chance to do anything about it.
Yeah, the degree to which it just sort of felt like blue dark ritual a lot of the time is actually startling.
Yep. One other card before we leave Standard and move on to Legacy and Vintage. Another card that people have been pointing out as being strong and worthy of at least discussion is Tablet of Discovery.
Absolutely. So another one of the themes of the cards is mana, right? Badger Cub and Grand are both big mana engines. Tablet of Discovery, kind of the same thing. And if you look at the format as it existed before these bans, it's pretty easy to say the Jeskai Revelation decks are the big winners. You still have Tablet of Discovery. Sure, you can't play the Lessons variant of it anymore because Grand gone, or at least that deck got weaker.
Yeah.
But you could easily build this deck with just Tablet of Discovery and Jeskai Revelation and make a deck there. And that might end up being strong. It could end up being really strong, but really predictive metagame analysis after banning cards as strong as Badger Cub and Storm Chaser's talent is so hard.
Yeah.
It is really hard to predict where the format is going to go from here. We can't really see all of the stuff that Badger Cub was holding back. We can't really see all the different ways to play that have been unlocked.
Yeah.
So control decks in general are usually more beatable than other strategies because they give you more time.
Yeah.
So think it is likely that as the format develops, the Jeskai Revelation decks will find new foes to fight that keep them in check.
Yeah.
And we didn't think we needed to take action against Tablet of Discovery now, but we will have to see where things go from here as the format kind of plays out.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting because I played a lot of that tablet deck, and it has that lessons package. You lose Grand certainly. The deck kind of sided it out sometimes, but are the shocks still good? Are the removal spells still as good? Kind of depends on what the format looks like after that.
Right.
I think Jadian's point on us being nervous about making too many predictive bans is something to really highlight there as well, where there's always going to be something that gets left untouched. We don't want to ban 10 cards at a time. So there's always going to be a question of, okay, I have identified the strongest thing that did not get hit. Do I think that's going to be a problem? And a lot of the time for us, the question becomes, okay, how far down do we have to go before something sounds answerable? Or there are ways in the environment to address this sort of thing, and something that is I don't want to say linear control deck, but we'll say a hard control deck where it's hard for a card with a 7-mana instant in it to really get that much more aggressive most of the time, is the type of thing that looks like it could be exploitable in such a way that we think it gives the environment room to adapt.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's move on to Legacy and Vintage. First, I'm going to talk about as people noted, there were different explanations between the Japanese article and the English article. That's on me. It'll get updated at some point in time, and you can find an English translation of the Japanese one in the meantime. We will get that up eventually, but we're going to talk through that here as well. So the action that was taken in Legacy and Vintage was similar. We will talk about them separately, but it was the same card. It was Fantasticar, the Fantasticar. So this was banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage, because we restrict things in Vintage. So Carmen, let's talk about the Fantasticar.
Yes, this is one where, generally speaking, it is pretty clear that we made a mistake. We missed the mark on power level here. 3-mana artifacts are things that are particularly fraught when it comes to Vintage, whenever it comes to stuff like Mishra's Workshop. Those types of cards slot in very easily, and it is not very hard to just run them through a league if something even looks strong. In this case, the Fantasticard lived up to the hype, and we saw Raker shops in particular, that's Glaring, Flesh Raker, sort of combo-y artifact shops, end up surge to the top of the metagame, winning a lot, and we saw its population in the metagame go up over time as well as its win rate, which is particularly concerning. Generally, that's always going to pressure towards 50% as its metagame share climbs. This was just kind of a no-brainer on terms of needing to restrict it and reduce the ability for people to actually build around the car itself. This is something where, if it shows up from time to time, it's one of the most powerful things that's ever been printed in Magic, and something that Vintage players like to do a lot of the time. You go there if you want to do the really powerful, flashy stuff, and that's what this is, but we do not want to see a single archetype shoot up to that type of win rate that quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I think, and we'll talk about this in Legacy too, I think the interesting thing about, what kind of turned me early on was someone talking about what are the different points of interaction. Like you can force of will the Fantasticar, but after that, it's just they have to cast a spell, not resolve a spell, and so it was pretty challenging to interact with as well.
Right, it's also the point where the opportunity cost of it is so low, where a lot of the things it's rewarding you for doing are things that are already strong to do, where it's asking you to do pay deck building costs such as put Moxes in your deck, put 0-mana artifacts in your deck, put rituals in your deck, put reactive spells in your deck. Those are just not that hard. Those aren't hard bars to clear. Or spin your wheels with something like a cantrip, like a Ponder or a Brainstorm, and so on. So at that point, it feels like you're just getting to quote-unquote free roll it a little bit too often.
So let's talk about Legacy, and then I want to talk about some of the design issues as well.
Yeah, totally. So this is something I'm happy to kind of, we'll tackle both of those at the same time. How about that? So this is a card that came out of a pre-constructed deck and had an impact on Legacy, which isn't inherently a negative thing when you isolate that sentence. So we've seen in the past cards like True Name Nemesis kind of came in a little bit hotter than we would have liked at the time. But we've also seen some cards that have had debatably positive impact in Legacy. I think most recently Colossal Grave Reaver out of Tarkir Dragonstorm Commander is something that we saw show up in some all-in Reanimator decks as a pretty fun way to go. We saw Kappa Cannoneer breathe new life into the mono blue 8-cast decks and so on. Unfortunately, the Fantasticar is a card that ended up seeing play in Uber. So this is UB, blue-black, just called Uber as a sort of control-y mid-range deck that also got to play this card alongside cards like Mishra's Bauble and things that let you just cast a bunch of those cantrips later on. We also saw a white variant of it. We saw a bunch of things that were kind of under the umbrella of Car Stompy. So these are playing a bunch of fast mana with various ways to abuse it. That could have been colorless artifacts, red with Blood Moons, blue with cards like Hull Breacher. I would say it was most successful in shells like Doomsday, powered out by Dark Ritual. We saw it in Rakdos Reanimator, 8-cast, Izzet Welder, some of them being the Sewer Valence combo deck. We saw the mono black Beseech the Mirror Storm decks making use of it. We saw Mystic Forge artifact decks. We saw versions of Delverless Delver that were playing just this card and Corey Steelcutter to actually try and kill people, cutting all of their creatures. Not something we like to see. We saw sort of Azorius, more fair decks with Tomio and Murktide Regent, just backed up by Lotus Petal and Mishra's Bauble. We saw some of the Arclight Phoenix decks of old with Buried Alive being cranked out with Dark Ritual that slots very well with this, and we saw a lot of the Painter's Servant combo decks using it. I could do that bit all day, but whenever we see a single card have that broad of an impact across the format, that's something that's going to catch our attention, and we don't really think this is having the most positive impact on the format because of how hard it pressures towards fast mana, towards game compression, and how much it limits the kinds of cards you can play in the format. Ultimately, most of those decks are playing one of 2 or 3 classes of cards, either Dark Ritual, 0 mana artifacts, or something to that effect. And we really, really would like to try and decompress games in Legacy. This is something we've been trying to do over the last year or so, get more of the old lands decks into the mix, more Swords to Plowshares seeing play, that sort of interactive gameplay where you do get to kind of make use of Wasteland in a long game rather than just putting your opponent to 0 lands and hoping they die the following turn.
Yeah. So let's talk about the design of this card because again, pre-con. This was in looking at this, we've certainly had some notable cards come out of pre-con. True Name Nemesis, Kappa Cannoneer. This is the first one from a Commander pre-con. We went through this before, but the first card printed first in a Commander pre-con that we banned. And again, in that Japanese article, there was some talk about changing some processes around that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So this is something where we've added additional steps in the process for all of our, let's say all of our products that don't go through standard. There is now a phase in the process where myself as well as some other people will flag things to basically say, hey, what are ways that we can tweak these designs to have them be more palatable in our Eternal formats. We want to make sure that as we make cards that are fun in places like Commander, it's not at the expense of our Eternal formats, given that there aren't rotations in things like Legacy or Vintage. We do care a lot that whenever we release a quote-unquote forever card, it's not at risk of making the format worse forever. So I think I spoke to this on a recent stream, but for example, you see a lot of 3-mana cards that are ideally in the future going to be coming out of these sorts of products. You're going to see them with 2 colored pips instead of 1 colored pip to make them be a bit weaker alongside Ancient Tombs. So I know Broadside Bombardiers is an example of a card that some people really like and some people really do not like, and us being more intentional with those sorts of shots is something that we care a lot about, and making sure that they land in a spot that makes the format more fun is something we care a lot about, and we're still developing a lot of those heuristics. It takes there's an obligatory, it takes a long time to steer the ship, but it is something that we have added additional phases in our process on and are acting to make sure that we are serving all of our Magic players.
Okay. Are there certain things in a card design that you're like flagging, like for instance, Fantastic Art costing 3 and being castable off Mishra's Workshop? Are there things like that that you're looking for that you're like, oh, this has this quality, and so we should take a closer look at it?
Yeah, there are certain pillars of the format where seeing if something immediately hooks into Brainstorm, if it plays really well with Force of Will, if you want to cast it from exile or something like that. You know, if we were to make a card that was easy to pitch or played well in a certain historic combo deck like Doomsday or played well with Mishra's Workshop, those are all things where, because the formats that we are thinking about change very gradually, we actually do sort of have the ability to be a little bit more predictive than we can be with Standard, or at least know. We can know in 2 years when the cards we're working on today come out that Brainstorm is probably still going to be showing up in Legacy. We should be compensating for that a little bit.
Yep. All right. We can come back and talk more about Legacy Vintage and the Fantastic Car if people have additional questions. It always helps me tag @Magic in the chat to find them. And we will come back to Q&A at the end, but we want to briefly touch on a couple of the other formats that didn't have changes. So let's start by talking about Modern, because we just had a Pro Tour there, so I'm interested in
definitely.
on Modern.
Yeah, I was privileged enough to actually be in Amsterdam talking with a lot of the players, got a couple of team drafts in with the pros and had a good bit of fun doing that. But Modern overall looks like it's in a pretty healthy place at the moment. We're seeing a pretty wide spread of decks being represented. We've had a couple of new breakout decks at the Pro Tour that I was pretty excited to see. We saw a brand new archetype backed by Cosmo Goyf that was sort of a combo fling deck, which is sort of the dream to a lot of new Magic players, which is pretty cool, using old favorites like Serum Powder. We also saw a team have a bunch of success using Slumbering Trudge alongside Fight Rigging to sort of give a faster angle to the traditionally very slow Eldrazi ramp decks that gave that team a ton of success. So Modern right now is a spot where it feels like there's still a lot of innovation to be had, or at least as long as you respect certain things in the format, the Izzet Affinities and the Boros Energies of the world, you can find success. We saw a lot of people able to do well at the Pro Tour itself with things like Wilderness Reclamation backed up by Waterlogged Teachings to have a pretty convoluted never deck yourself combo with an Endurance. We saw Samwise combo backed up by a Johnny from Boros Energy because Cauldron Familiar turns out is a cat that can die and transform it. So there's a lot going on to actually try out in Modern right now. But if you have mastered a deck like Amulet Titan or something like that, you can still find success. So at the moment, we don't feel like there's anything that is problematically strong. Even coming out of the Pro Tour weekend, we saw decks that didn't have hot weekends at the Pro Tour, like the blue-black Fairer Psychic Frog decks doing well on Magic Online. So at the moment, we're pretty happy with all of the things that people who like Modern can do in the format.
Okay. I'll throw this question out there just because we're talking about Modern right now. First of all, chat, thank you. I see all the questions coming in, but this one's particularly relevant. Is Kozilek's Command on your radar for Modern after its PT performance and how versatile and powerful it is?
Yeah, that's a card that we are keeping an eye on. It is definitely one of the stronger. I'm going to put air quotes around fair. I'm glad they put us back up on the screen so I didn't have to enunciate it too hard. It is something that generally we've struggled to make satisfying interactive cards for Eldrazi decks, which historically, if you think back to Eldrazi Winter, that deck was kind of one-dimensional, where it just put big creatures onto the battlefield, crossed its fingers, and hoped that was good enough. So overall, we like that it feels like that deck has an angle to try and interact with players. It's not clear that that card is not inappropriate. It's possible that some of the linear things that it lets you do in the spawns draw mode that can be too strong, and that's something we are keeping an eye on. But at the moment, given that the decks that did well at the Pro Tour that are using it, between Brood Scale as well as the Trudge Eldrazi Ramp and traditional Eldrazi Ramp decks, have not been doing too well in the wake of the Pro Tour results, it's not something that we think is appropriate to take action against this time, but it's not something that I would write off.
Yeah. All right. Okay, let's move on to some of these questions. I'm going to take the first question because it's my show. Also, the question was, will you revive Pioneer? We get some version of this question basically every BNR, and I come prepared. So I talked to Billy Jensen before this, and he said that I am able to say that we are currently planning, so this is the current state of the plan. We have not announced the schedule for 2027 yet, but we know there's particular interest in Pioneer, and so we're a little bit ahead here. This is the current state of the plan. Could it change? Yes. Will it change? Probably not. But the current state of the plan is to have a round of Pioneer RCQs and an RC round in 2027 for Pioneer. That is the current state of the plan. We will be announcing more about 2027 obviously coming up, but I know people are always asking about Pioneer. So I wanted to get you all updated on that. All right, next up. So going back to Legacy and Vintage, there was a question about unbans. Was there any discussion about unbans in Legacy and Vintage this time around?
Yeah, so generally speaking, that's something that we want to deploy whenever it looks like the format is stale or we don't have other action that is going to be changing the metagame. So last time we checked, currently we are looking at changing the format in a big way by banning a card that shows up in a lot of different decks, a whole notepad full of them. And before that, we had banned a card that was kind of applying a lot of pressure on the format in Candelabra of Tawnos, which had this sort of colorless, more incremental combo deck that we didn't think was going to be healthy for the format long term. So that was a reason that we wanted to make a change that would hopefully open up a lot of options in the format. And a lot of the reasons that we would make an unban is if we thought the format were stable but stale and players were maybe tired of it. That's really a button we only get to push so many times, the unbans that is. And so it's something that whenever we do it, I generally think it is better if we do it responsibly and with intentionality. So I would say a card like Deathray Shaman is something that very near and dear to my heart. If you Google my tournament results from the outside, I played a lot with Deathray Shaman and love it. But whenever we do it, I want it to make, I think it's important that whenever it is joyous, it's something that actually breathes new life into the format and isn't just because. And I think it would be pretty disappointing if we were to say, pair it with a banning of a card, and then it turned out it didn't really do anything as the format reset to where it used to be.
Yep. I will take the next question because there's a number of people asking it. Again, the difference between the Japanese article and the English article, totally an internal error. We will get the Japanese error explanation ported to English. It's probably not going to happen today, maybe. That's an internal error. It's not a conspiracy. So we will get that updated so that people can refer to that when they're looking at that discussion. But I think Carmen covered it beautifully here as well. There was another question still on Legacy Vintage. And this one may be more difficult to answer, but you can at least speak to it. So with Eternal Weekend coming up, should we expect any more changes in Legacy Vintage, or is this the format more or less we should expect for Eternal Weekend?
So we are always hoping for stability. We're hoping for it here in particular because I know that a lot of people kind of plan their whole year around Eternal Weekend. I know personally that's something that I've always had sort of back before I worked for Wizards, had the one event that I was excited to go to all year and could not wait for it. And I really want to make sure that the players who do set aside vacation time, make travel plans, get ready and build their deck and tune their sideboard and collect all the cards they need for it, that they have a really good time.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways that we can do that for a format that does have the history, the longevity of something like Legacy or Vintage is to try and give that stability over time. So this is a spot where I would say the bar for making changes is a little bit higher than it normally would be. But at the end of the day, we do also want to make sure that when people set aside the time to go to those sorts of events, that they are going to have a good time.
Yeah.
So I would say it's not 0% that we make changes from here, but hopefully the format that you see today is going to be close to the one that you're getting.
Great. Let's see, we did that. There was a question about any updates for Commander. So Gavin Verhey put out a video, I think it was Sunday, where he just said nothing was happening now, but the Commander format panel is meeting, I think, in September. And if there are any changes, they would likely come after that. We don't necessarily keep Commander to the same BNR schedule as everything else, but we do try to line them up where possible, just because it makes sense. So if there are changes, if it lines up with the next BNR, it would be October 12th. If there's going to be a different date for any Commander changes, we'll try to communicate that when we can. All right, next up, there were some other various questions about cards in Legacy. So some people were asking, I think the most asked about cards were Tamiyo, the One Ring, and Flow State.
I think all of those are pretty reasonable cards to think about. I know the One Ring and Tamiyo have been cards that have gone back and forth a little bit in the last year or so. It's really hard to tell how problematic any of those cards are versus if they are just strong cards. I know Tamiyo had started to actually go down in play rate shortly before our Candelabra ban. That may have been related to the strength of the Candelabra deck.
Yep.
But in some ways, as you start to see creature interaction come up in the format, you also see Tamiyo's meta share come down over time. So it's really hard to tell if any of those cards are problematically strong or just strong.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When is the next Canadian Highlander points update? I don't know. We don't manage that.
It was like Canlander at lunch again.
I didn't bring any decks.
I quit. I'm off it.
Sorry. We have a large group.
There are dozens of us.
Are you not in the chat? There are dozens of us. I'll add you to the chat. Okay. All right, let's see. I'll ask this. We've been asked this question a number of times, and I think our answer has been pretty much the same. But I'll ask it anyway because it's a popular question here. Has there been any thought or conversation given to creating a legacy format panel, much like we have for Pauper and Commander?
I think at this point, that's something we would generally prefer to handle in-house. I think that's about all I could say at this point.
Yeah, it makes sense. And there are, Pauper's kind of a tournament format, but it's small. Commander's obviously a completely different beast.
Yeah, especially given recently the move to have some amount of the commander stuff be in-house, it's just directionally different than a lot of the ways that those things have moved in the last couple of years.
Yep, yep. And that's not to say, you all speak to experts outside the building in some of these formats as well, right? Yeah. So it's not like we don't have an official legacy format, but you speak to other people outside the building about their feelings on these formats, correct?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a lot of why we end up going to, and I know this is a sort of beast of a different color, but that's why we end up going to Pro Tours and the like, is to make sure that we're gathering perspectives of people who aren't just in the Emerald City, so to speak.
Yeah, yep. Makes sense. All right. I think we are about out of questions that we're able to answer. That's not to say you all don't have excellent questions coming too. Some of them we've already answered earlier in the show, and some of them we just don't have answers. I'm just double checking to make sure we don't miss any good questions while we have our guests here. All right. So I think we are going to call it there. Thank you for tuning in. Next week on Weekly MTG, we will have our product opening stream for The Hobbit. It's a little late. Yes, it is, because we wanted to do this stream today and make sure we talked about these changes, but I'm going to miss my opportunity to open some cool product. So next week, we will be on stream to talk through the different Hobbit product offerings. Again, yes, it's a little late. Yes, I'm still going to do it because it's awesome. Other than that, thank you to my two wonderful guests for talking us through the banned and restricted changes. We will get the legacy stuff updated at some point. I'm not promising a timeline. That's on me. But until then, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.